Hi, I'm Haley, and today let's bust some dog myths. Myth number one, wagging tail doesn't always mean happy dog. A wagging tail is actually more indicative of a dog that's just overstimulated. A lot of aggressive dogs that are reacting or dogs that are about to get in a fight or attack will often be wagging their tail really quickly right before they bite or right before they attack. And in contrast, a fearful dog may also be wagging its tail, but they're terrified. Why is that? A wagging tail is just a sign of overstimulation. Nothing more, nothing less. Dogs can wag their tails when they're happy, but they can also wag them when they're scared or anxious or when they're about to attack. Really, a wagging tail is just a sign of some form of overstimulation. The higher the tail wag, usually the higher the stimulation. So, with a lot of aggressive dogs, you may see that tail up nice and high, whereas with a fearful dog, it'll be closer to being tucked or really low and wagging. And then, kind of in the midpoint, is more of a happy dog wag. Of course, this doesn't apply to every single case and every single dog. There are dogs with curly tails that are up all the time, and then there are dogs that have tails that are just naturally more down all the time. But as a general rule, wagging tail doesn't always mean happy. Next myth, your dog really likes when you pet him. Contrary to popular belief and contrary to the way humans have been raising dogs for the last however many years, a lot of dogs actually don't like to be touched that much. Dogs give pretty clear signals in their minds of being uncomfortable. Us humans are just not very good at recognizing them. One of our dogs, he prefers not to be pet. He always wants to be close to us. He's just not a big fan of being pet. The other one, she would sit there and let you pet her all day long. Dogs are different in that way. Some dogs love to be pet, some hate it, and some just tolerate it. This is where dog body language comes in. And really, if you have a dog, you should learn more about dog body language. If your dog gets to the point of growling or trying to snap or bite, they've already shown a whole ladder of progression of body language that you've missed, that they're stressed or that they're uncomfortable or that they just don't quite like what's going on. So if you go to pet your dog and they start showing some just minor stress signals, that may signal to you that maybe you should just hang out with them without petting them so much. A really good way to advocate for your dog is if they don't enjoy certain things, don't make them go through those things. There's nothing wrong with a dog that doesn't like being pet. There's nothing wrong with the dog that doesn't like humans all over them all the time. Dogs are allowed to be individuals too. They're allowed to have boundaries. It's just that us humans are not very good at recognizing their body language before it gets to the point of growling or biting. Myth number three, if your dog growls at you, it means they're aggressive. Not necessarily. Dogs growl for all sorts of reasons, one of those main reasons just being is communication. There's been plenty of times when my dogs have been playing with each other and one of them growls at the other one. All that means is to back off. Doesn't mean they're aggressive, doesn't mean that they're going to bite somebody. All it means is that they're trying to communicate that they're uncomfortable or that they want space in some way. Growling is a form of communication for dogs, and often if you find that your dog is growling at you when you go to pet them or when you go to interact with them, it's probably because you've missed those earlier signs that the dog's uncomfortable. Dog body language is key if you own a dog. That is the best way to prevent bites because you'll know when they're uncomfortable way before they ever even have the chance to growl. And to piggyback off the last one, myth number four is that dogs just snap out of nowhere. It is actually super rare for a dog to not give you clear communication that they're uncomfortable. There is actually a whole ladder of steps that dogs go through to show you that they're stressed or uncomfortable before they ever start growling or biting. Now, I know just like with everything, there is a little nuance to this, and of course, there are dogs that stand outside of this criteria. However, it is extremely rare. An example that I often see online is a family that has had a dog for 10 years and they've talked about what a great dog it is, and then one day it just snaps at one of the kids. Now, I can almost guarantee you, unless these families had a real strong understanding of dog body language, that the dog didn't just snap out of nowhere. See, the thing that we don't understand is that we don't speak dog language and they don't speak our language. If we're uncomfortable with something, we can just tell the other person we're uncomfortable with it. Dogs don't have that luxury. Dogs do, however, have the ability to communicate with us with their body language. Some signs that they're uncomfortable or stressed could be lip licking, yawning, turning their head in avoidance, stiff body posture, that high, fast tail wag we were talking about earlier, whale eye. All of those are signs that a dog's uncomfortable and is trying to give you a warning that they don't want you in their space. And you may think that these things are really subtle, but the dog slowly starts using signs that are not as subtle. So the dog may start with something like a little bit of well eye, but then the next time you go to get in their face, they may turn their head in complete avoidance and try to look completely away from you. If their signs keep getting ignored, then eventually they progress higher on the ladder to things like growling or things like snapping. But most dogs do not just go from being a happy go lucky dog all the time to snapping at people the next day. So if you have a dog and you're wondering why all of a sudden they're growling and snapping, it may be worth going back in history and looking at the things that the dog maybe has tried to tell you that you've just not recognized. If you have a dog, I think it's really important to study dog body language in some capacity. And if you're unsure, a really good way to look at dog body language is to record your dogs and what they do when you try to interact and then put it in slow motion. It's a lot easier to catch signs that way. And then you get good at reading them, so then you can tell if your dog is uncomfortable or not. This is the safest way to own dogs, and it is the best way to prevent your dog from just snapping out of nowhere. Myth number 5. When your dog's a puppy, in order to have them friendly to other dogs and humans, you should let them interact with other dogs and humans as much as possible. This could not be further from the truth. That's a really good way to train your dog to be reactive. So, in other words, you're walking your dog on a leash, and all of a sudden a dog walks by. Your dog bolts to the end of their line, lunging, barking, maybe even growling, and they are so frustrated that they can't get to that other dog. Why? Because you've taught them they get to meet all the other dogs. So basically, they're just frustrated that they can't get to what they're wanting to get to. Dogs react out of two emotions typically. The first one is frustration. So you see it a lot with dogs who frequent dog parks or who have a lot of dog friends, or who are allowed to meet strangers while they're out on walks. Whenever they don't have the opportunity to meet another dog or to meet a stranger that they see, they try desperately to get to that thing and then get super frustrated when the leash keeps them from doing that thing. A good way to fix this is to train the dog and show them that they don't get to meet everything that they see. They don't get to interact with every stranger. And if you take your dog to dog parks, stop doing that. Another reason your dog might be exhibiting this behavior is because of fear. So, in contrast to the frustration, they don't actually want to get to their target, they want the target to go away. So, a really good example is a skateboard goes past you, the dog starts lunging and growling, and then when the skateboard's out of sight, the dog's fine, completely back to normal. They may show some displacement behaviors like sniffing around or marking or whatever, but for the most part, once the trigger's out of sight, the dog thinks it succeeded in scaring off the threat, so to speak. Enough about reactivity. Let's move on to myth number 6. The best way to prevent resource guarding is to stick your hands in your dog's food bowl while they're eating. This could not be further from the truth. You know, the best thing you can do to prevent resource guarding whenever they're small, as long as they're not already having issues with resource guarding, leave them alone. Let them eat. There certainly are not people that come up to you sticking your hands in your food. Now, I'm not saying if your dog's a resource guarder, you shouldn't intervene. I definitely think you can intervene in that. But if you're solely trying to prevent it from happening in the first place, say you get a puppy and you're like, well, I don't want him to eventually growl over his food, so I'm going to make sure for every meal I go and pester him, that's going to have the opposite reaction. All you're doing is showing the dog that you are a threat to their food bowl, and that's probably going to cause them to become a resource guarder. I think it's also worth mentioning that the same progression applies here as in any other situation. So if you walk over to your dog while they have a resource or their food and they're given those stress signals like the well eye, the lip licking, other things, there's a good chance that they're already slightly resource guarding. I'm not sure that I would be concerned about that really. I mean, our thought process is we don't mess with our dogs if they're just eating their food, but most of the time they're eating their food in a different way, through a feeder toy or a puzzle or doing nose work with their food or doing training. So we usually don't have to worry about that. But if they are just eating their food out of a bowl or something, it's our best policy just to leave the dog alone. And that's worked pretty good for us. And it works good for a lot of dogs because you're never teaching the dog that you're a threat to their food. You couldn't care less about their food, and you want them to know that. Enough about resource garden. Let's talk about myth number 7. You should take your dogs to dog parks so they can get socialized. You should not take your dogs to dog parks for any reason. The only purpose I've seen a dog park be useful is if you want to train your dog if they're reactive, then you can go to a dog park but not enter the dog park and just train outside of the gate. That's a really good way to work on reactivity. It worked for us when we were working with Shelby and Gunner, and it works for a lot of people because those dogs are running around doing whatever, but they can't get to your dog, so it's a safe environment to practice this. And you also get exposure to a bunch of different dogs. But there is that gate in between you that's keeping your dog safe. Not only is disease pretty rampant in dog parks most of the time, you also don't know these dogs. So you could have a dog in there that is not going to get along well with your dog. You would not know that until a fight's already happening. There's a lot of rude dogs in dog parks and dog daycares for that matter. There's very few that actually provide services that I'd recommend for dog owners. But situations where you just throw a bunch of random dogs in a gate and just see what happens, that just sounds very irresponsible to me. You're always going to have those situations where there's a dog that doesn't want to be there and is tucking its tail underneath its owner, and the owner thinks it's funny. And then you're going to have another dog that's rude and pushy and trying to hump all the other dogs. And I feel like it's a whole dog park stereotype. There's always one dog there that fits one of the dog park stereotypes. And I just don't think you should subject your dog to that type of thing. If you want your dog to get along with other dogs, the best way to do that is to teach them to be neutral around other dogs first. What that looks like is going to the dog park and making your dog lay down outside the gate and just watching the dogs run around inside the gate. Your dog just needs to do nothing. And you just need to practice that. And your dog will eventually be neutral around other dogs, more than likely. What this does is it prevents overexcitement, so your dog doesn't become super rude and pushy because they're overly excited about getting in contact with another dog. It also prevents them from being attacked by random dogs. So you could have a few friends that have dogs and you could meet up with them to let your dog play with dogs that you know are more stable. If you just throw your dog into a dog park with a bunch of random dogs, you have no idea what the temperament of any of those dogs are. There's a saying online that you'll never find vet staff or dog trainers at the dog park, and it's for those reasons. Next myth, whatever number we're on, is that if your dog gets in a dog fight, it means they're aggressive towards dogs. Dogs actually get into dog fights for all sorts of reasons. Overstimulation's a big one. So two perfectly friendly dogs that love other dogs could very well get into a dog fight if there's just too much pressure put on them. So if they run up to each other too fast, or if one dog's being a little too pushy and their body language is being ignored by the other dog. And another reason dog fights happen pretty often is leashes. Leashes are a way that prevents the dog from doing exactly what they want to do. So in the case of you're walking down the street, you let your dog greet another dog, both of the dogs go to the end of their leash, both leashes are tight, and then they get into a fight. That is a very common occurrence. Frustration builds in the dog. It causes them to take the frustration out on whatever is closest to them. So another good example is if your dog is reacting on a walk. So if they're barking and lunging at the end of the leash at another dog, even if they're not meeting that other dog, and then you try to pull them back into you and they redirect and bite you, that's another good example of the dog is just going to go for whatever is closest to relieve their frustration. So in the case of leashes, if another dog rushes up to your dog and your dog's on a leash, then chances are your dog's going to feel a little bit trapped by that leash. Now, that can be because of two reasons, just like with reactivity. It can be because of frustration, because they want to get to the dog and do whatever they want to do. Or the other option is that they're fearful. And of course, a fearful dog has two responses, fight or flight. If they don't have flight, because the leash takes away the flight option, they only have one option left. So if your dog gets into a dog fight, don't automatically assume that they're aggressive. There is a whole list of reasons why a dog might get into a fight, and very few of those reasons are a truly aggressive dog. A lot of the times it's just a case of overstimulation and humans reading the body language wrong and allowing their dog to invade the space of dogs that are uncomfortable. Next myth. It is considered spoiling your dog to feed them all the food and treats in the world and let them lay on the couch all day. This is actually so far opposed to what dogs were bred for and what dogs desire. Now, of course, dogs love their food and they love treats, but dogs also mentally really want to actually do something to gain their food. What that looks like is training with their food, using puzzle toys, using feeder toys. Like in my video about how to tire out your dog, I gave a whole laundry list of ways you can tire out your dog, and most of them involve using the dog's food. Because actually spoiling your dog means that you're letting them do things other than just eat and sleep all day. It means taking them hiking, taking them for walks, letting them do puzzle toys, taking them outside. It means fulfilling their needs as a dog. Because remember, these are dogs. They're not humans. While eating a whole sleeve of Oreos and rotting on the couch looks like a really good day for us, it doesn't look so great to a dog. Now, keep in mind, if you have a dog for years and you constantly don't exercise them and constantly just make them lay inside on the couch all day, you can train a dog to be lazy, but on the inside, they still really want some kind of stimulation. So if you really want to spoil your dog, stop worrying about the frilly outfits and stop worrying about giving them treats 24/7 or letting them lay on the couch all day long, and get outside and do something that's going to work their brain, because that's what dogs are for and that's what dogs enjoy to do. And anything less than that, your dog is probably not enjoying it. Dogs need a mixture of physical exercise and mental exercise. And if they don't get those things, they'll often resort to doing things inside the house that are not so great for us, like chewing and destroying things, or they may become really stressed and anxious, or they may start becoming reactive because they're trying to get an outlet for their energy some other way. So if you really want to spoil your dog, forget letting them lay on the couch and take them for a hike. Next myth. Once you train your dog, they're trained forever. This, unfortunately, is a truth that I had to learn by experience. If you train your dog to sit in your living room, they're not going to remember sit in 10 years if you never use it. So you could very well take your dog to a board and train, have a trainer do all the work of training it, and then if when you bring that dog home, you don't do any of the commands that it knows, if you don't practice those things and keep those things fresh, the dog's going to regress. Most of the time, ending up worse than they were before. Dog training is a constant thing, and there's no such thing as a totally trained dog. If you're not actively using those skills in some way, then the dog's likely going to lose those skills. So it's best practice to always keep your dog fresh on their commands or their tricks that you want them to know, because otherwise they're not going to be very good at performing those behaviors. Next myth. Your dog barking on the leash is trying to protect you, or your dog running to the door barking is trying to protect you. There are a few reasons why a dog might bark or growl or lunge if someone gets close to you. The first one, reactivity, which has more to do with frustration and fear. The second one is straight out aggression, which has nothing to do with protecting you. It has everything to do with the dog trying to protect itself. Another reason that a dog might be barking or growling or lunging when somebody gets close to you is if they're resource guarding you, which has nothing to do with protecting you. It just means they view you as a resource, the same way that they would guard a bone that they like. What I'll see a lot on TikTok in particular is people posting videos of their dog protecting their kid, when really the situation is just the dog is resource guarding the kid from its parent. A lot of the times this can happen if you let your dog just sit there and hang out under your kid's high chair and get all those scraps falling down. They start to view your kid as a pretty valuable resource, and therefore they don't want anybody taking that resource away from them. This is very dangerous, okay? This is not your dog protecting your kid. They're not going to bite somebody to protect your kid. They may bite the parents for trying to pick the kid up off the floor, but this is such a bad behavior. And if your dog is doing this, I can guarantee they're not doing it out of a place of wanting to protect you or protect your child. Another reason your dog might be barking or growling when somebody comes near you is because you are close to a resource that they find valuable. So resource garden, but not garden you. Or they could be fearful of the person or the thing that's coming close to you. So unless your dog's had formal protection training, chances are they're not actually protecting you. So now you tell me, did any of these myths shock you? Did you already know that these were myths? If so, let me know down below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.